Tonight we're going to start our Lesson 5 on religion. I would suggest that before you complete the video that you take the time to pre-read your guided notes to help you in selecting your answers. And although in the past I've put all of the answers on the screen, this particular lesson there will be some that were missing to encourage you to use the audio and listen to the whole video. Now let's get started on ancient Egypt's religion. The religion of ancient Egypt had about 700 different gods and goddesses. This screen is just a snapshot of some of them. If you look closely at some of the pictures, you will notice that they have the heads of animals on them, some of them. That ties in with that cult of animals that I talked about in class. Some of them were all animal and some just had the heads of animals. All 700 gods and goddesses had to be worshipped and kept happy through festivals, offerings, it could be food or jewelry, their own temples, which means there was a sizable building program across Egypt, artwork, and more. The financial resources, or the money that went into the worship of all 700 gods, were a considerable drain on the Egyptian economy. The ceremonies that priests were required to perform took whole days and were their full-time job. In fact, ritual bathing was a very large part of it, so as a result, their priests were pretty healthy because they took lots and lots of baths. In addition to their religious duties, priests also had management duties. They had to organize the operations of the temple workshops, farmlands, and building or rebuilding of houses and temples. They also spent time studying religion, law, and other subjects in the temple libraries, and at night they would climb up to the flat roof of the temple to observe the movements of the stars. So they were responsible for keeping an eye on the calendar on behalf of the pharaoh. The temple estates and workshops employed many people of various skills who worked alongside the priests. People sometimes sought help and shelter during hard economic times. Sometimes old people, after an initial donation, of course, had a place to live in for the rest of their days. Egyptian temples were also their theaters. On important religious festival days, religious plays were performed outside the gate of the temple relating to the life, murder, resurrection, and the deification of Osiris, patron god of the dead. Deification means his making him into a god. He becomes a deity. One of the more famous aspects of the Egyptian religious beliefs was their idea about the afterlife. They believed the physical body had to be preserved to allow a place for their spirit, or the Ka, to return to in the afterlife. You can see the hieroglyph on this screen for the Ka are two arms up in the air, and when they're shown over the head of a statue, it's supposed to be where the spirit comes to. Because of this belief, mummification was performed to preserve the body so the Ka could recognize and find their body after they were dead. This particular painting demonstrates the return of the Ka, or the spirit, to the embalmed body while it's in the tomb. Tombs were then filled with items necessary for the trip to the underworld. Once a person was entombed or buried, it was the job of a priest or a family member to bring food and offerings to the temple daily for the gods. This slide shows a sarcophagus and the various grave goods laid around it. Exactly how does one make a mummy? This is the process of mummification. The chief embalmer, who is the person who does the actual preservation of the body, was a priest who wore the mask of Anubis. Anubis was the jackal-headed god of the dead. As this god, he was closely associated with mummification and embalming, which is why priests wore it throughout the process. First, the body was taken to the tent known as the Ibu, or the place of purification. There, the embalmers wash the body with good-smelling palm wine and rinse it with water from the Nile River. One of the embalmer's men makes a cut in the left side of the body and removes many of the internal organs. It is important to remove these because they are the first part of the body that starts to decompose. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines are washed and packed in natron inside canopic jars, which will dry them out. Natron is found naturally in Egypt and is a salt, and salt is a very, very powerful drying agent. This particular field shows the natron deposits in Egypt, not unlike the Great Salt Flats here in the United States. Each canopic jar is made to look like the god assigned to protect that organ. Hapi, the baboon-headed god, contained the lungs. Damutef, the jackal-headed god, contained the stomach. Imseti, the human-headed god, contained the liver. And Kubi-Senef, the falcon-headed god, contained the intestines. Once those internal organs were removed, a long hook was used to smash the brain and pull it out through the nose. As you can see in the diagram, that hook had to actually break through that hard cartilage that protects the brain cavity. On the right-hand side are some reproductions in a museum of some of the tools that they used to do this process. The body is now covered and stuffed with that natron, which will dry it out. All of the fluids and rags from the embalming process will be saved and buried along with the body. After 40 days, the body is washed again with water from the Nile. Then it is covered with oils to help the skin stay elastic. The dehydrated internal organs that were in those canopic jars are then wrapped in linen and returned to the body. The body is stuffed with dry materials such as sawdust, leaves, and linen so that it looks lifelike. Finally, the body is covered again with good-smelling oils. It's now ready to be wrapped in linen. First, the head and neck are wrapped with strips of fine linen. Then the fingers and the toes are individually wrapped. The arms and legs are wrapped separately. Between the layers of wrapping, the embalmers place amulets to protect the body in its journey through the underworld. And if you remember from the previous podcast, it was those amulets that the tomb robbers were looking for. Throughout the wrapping process, a priest reads spells out loud while the mummy is being wrapped. These spells will help ward off evil spirits and help the dead person make the journey to the afterlife. The arms and legs are tied together, and a papyrus scroll with spells from the Book of the Dead is placed between the wrapped hands. A cloth is wrapped completely around the body, and a picture of the god Osiris is painted on its surface. Finally, a large cloth is wrapped around the entire mummy. It is attached with strips of linen that run from the top to the bottom of the mummy and around its middle. A board of painted wood is placed on top of the mummy before the mummy is lowered into its coffin. The first coffin is then put inside a second coffin. This particular slide shows one of Tutankhamun's coffins. Once the mummification process is actually completed, which could take up to 70 or 80 days, the funeral is held for the deceased and his family mourns his or her death. A ritual called the opening of the mouth ceremony is performed, which allows the deceased to eat and drink again in the afterlife. After the funeral and the opening of the mouth ritual, the body and its coffins are placed inside a large stone sarcophagus in the tomb. Furniture, clothing, valuable objects, food, and drink are arranged in the tomb for the dead. Now his or her body is ready for its journey through the underworld. There, the heart will be judged by its good deeds on earth. If the heart is found to be pure, they will be sent to live for all eternity in the beautiful field of reeds. This concludes our podcast on ancient religion in Egypt. The website on this page was a tremendous source for me in putting this project together. If you'd like to go to it, it is actually sponsored by the British Museum, and the British are notorious for their involvement in the uncovering and the preservation of ancient Egyptian culture and artifacts. Thank you for joining us in Nana Productions.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.